Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our SQL Server, and we're going to download and install SQL Server, 2 different versions. We're going to download the Dev Edition, which is a full SQL Server standard installation. It's just free and it's only for development use. And then there is SQL Server Express. Now that you can use in production, but it has a lot of limitations. SQL Server Express is more like a tool that you would use kind of like Access. It's file-based. It doesn't have an engine that runs unless you open the file, whereas SQL Server Database Engine sits and waits for connections constantly. But you can use either version. So here you see I search for Microsoft Server Dev Download. Takes me to this page. And as you see, you could do on-premises or in the cloud. We'll get to cloud-based stuff later. But we're doing a specialized free edition. So it's full-featured free edition, licensed for use as a development and test database in a non-production environment. Whereas you can actually use Express in production environments, but it has a lot of limitations. One of them, for example, is you can't have a database greater than 1 gigabyte in size, for example. You can't do database replication, transaction log backup, stuff that you would really want in a production application. But if it's just a small website or something like that and just has some user logins and stuff, you can back up the file itself over time. And it's just like having different versions of the file. So it is something that you could use in production. I don't recommend it for something that is a true production application. So we're going to download both. So I'm going to click on download now. Starts downloading. Click on download now. Starts downloading. And as you see, it's downloading those. Now, another thing that you want to download so that you can interact, when you download these things, it comes with a command line tool to interact with the SQL database. There is a more robust GUI tool that you can use to manage the database, run queries against it without having to open up command line window. And that is SQL Server Management Studio. And that's changed quite a bit over the years, but just SSMS. And you'll see it's the first one, download SQL Server Management Studio. And then you click free download, click it. So I will start installing Visual Studio Dev first because it takes a while. Actually, I'll do Express first because that's pretty quick. And then I'll do Management Studio. And then finally, we'll do the big one. So Express, just going to do the basic installation. Accept. Install. This should be fairly fast. It is just a interpreter for SQL Server databases that are file-based rather than huge databases. It's hard to explain until you see it. Basically, I can pass you a database by literally emailing you a file that is a database. You can't do that with a SQL Server database. There are the files, the transaction logs, there's all kinds of stuff that's associated with it that makes it harder. You have to then connect it to a server that serves it up. This is serverless. So and take a break here while this downloads and installs, and we'll be back in just a second here. Okay, so that install completed, and here it is installed. It gives you some instructions on how to connect to it. So actually, let's cut and paste this into a text file. And again, SQL Server, Visual Studio Code is my favorite text editor. Except that it really updates every time you open it. It's a lot like Firefox. It's on my nerves. All right, so we're going to keep this here. So what it did is it created to connect to it, you use a localhost / SQL Express. You can create users in here. Right now it says trusted connection is true, which means I'm on the computer, trust me as the owner of the computer kind of thing. We can cover later a lot of the security details in SQL servers. This is not what you would use. First of all, usually your database server is another physical server, so you can't connect using the user on that computer. So anyway, this will be our connection to SQL Express. We don't care about any of this. So we can say, now, install SSMS. All that's going to do is open up the web page to install SSMS, which we already downloaded. I'll show you. And then you just click that. So we already did that part. So we're going to go back there, go to our downloads. And we're going to open up SSMS, which is SQL Server Management Studio. This is how you would connect to it, not by a command line. And really, this is the correct way to connect to it, if you will. So I think you have to finish up this installation first. So I can say close. It's all installed, ready to go. So now I can say install in the SQL Server Management Studio. And then when I go to open up SQL Server Management Studio, it says, what SQL Server do you want to connect to? I'm going to cut and paste in localhost / SQL Express. I mean, that's the default. I know it by heart, but you don't yet. So this is going to download and then install. And when it gets to the installation part, I will come back in just a second. So let's take a quick break. Okay, so it's all done. Setup is completed and it's been installed. So now I want to open it up and connect to my SQL Express database. So here I'm going to do Management Studio, pin that to my taskbar because it's very important. Once it opens. Okay, so now it's open in the taskbar. So I'm going to attach to SQL Express. So as you see, it already knows because it's the only server on here. It's just looked around and said, are there any servers I can run? SQL Express, sure, no problem. So same as localhost is the name of the machine itself. It doesn't matter. Localhost is a loopback, right? And then as you see here, I've got connection to the SQL Express. One second. So I've got a connection to the SQL Express. I can create a database. New database. And I can create it as, let's just do test 1. Okay. So now I've got a database. It's pretty simple. I can create tables in it. We'll get really deep into how databases work and things like that soon. I'm just showing you how to get this stuff installed and how it works. So finally, we're going to get to the development edition. So this is a much more powerful one. Notice here, we don't have a lot here as far as we just have the databases, security. We don't have a lot of things that come with SQL Server. One of them is, for example, SQL Agent, which is something that runs as a service and can clean up the database at night and re-index some tables and all the stuff that you do in SQL Express, you've got to do manually. You can't do things like that on a schedule. So just one example of, the limitations of SQL Express. Again, if it's just for a simple website, sure, I still wouldn't use it in production, but you certainly can. You have no other options. Because SQL Server Dev, you can't use in production, so you'd have to pay for it. It is rather expensive. So accept, install. So okay, so installation is complete. Now we want to make sure that we have all of the right options that we want. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But we see here, it already knows that the SQL Server is localhost. And so you don't even need a named instance. You can set a named instance, but you don't need to. If I click connect now, I think it'll probably come up with a command line version of the connection. Yeah. So here I can say select star phone. I don't know. Sys. I don't even know if there's such a thing. All right, so whatever. So this is ready to go. So I can open up SQL Server Management Studio, and in the connection string, or in the connection, I can just connect to localhost. So exit, yes. Click it. Oh, this is perfectly. So I'm going to open up SQL Server Management Studio. And this is on my dev instance, which is a virtual machine running on my machine. So it take a little longer than it normally would. So here I'm just going to connect to localhost. Say connect. Now I'm connected to a completely different server, and it's a full server. And as you see here, I've got more things, management. There's more I can do here. And I haven't installed SQL Server Agent or anything like that. We'll get into a lot of that stuff later, but it is enabled. I mean, sorry, it is installed, but not enabled, rather, I should say. So as you see here, I still have no databases. I would not see my SQL Server Express databases here. This is a completely separate server instance from the Express database. So the Express is file-based, and you can connect to each one of them. SQL Server is a server that serves many databases, if that makes sense. You can set a lot of settings here. We'll look at all of those eventually, but right now, the only way I can really connect to this instance is from my computer. We would have to open up my local firewall, certain ports, in order for it to be able to connect outside of it. I think it's 1433. Open that up so that other computers could connect to this server. You would have to make the authentication allowed to be not just Windows. It's called mixed mode. There's all kinds of stuff we would have to do. You have to create the, so there's a SQL Server configuration tool that was installed along with this. We'd have to configure that. There's a lot that we would need to do, but for development purposes, we can now connect to this from Visual Studio, and that's what we'll cover in the next video, along with a couple other finishing things for Visual Studio. So make sure to stay tuned for those as well.